My name is Rainer. I'm 78. I used to build bridges as an engineer, but now I seem to have become a bridge myself between generations, between memory and oblivion. I live alone, in an old house on the outskirts of Chicago. My wife, Sarah, passed away 6 years ago, and my children, they are there. But it's as if they're not there. I have 3 children, Alex, Mary, and Josh. All grown up, with families, careers, their own worries. They come for Christmas, or if they need something. They rarely call. They say that they are too busy, that the children are sick, or they forgot. I sit by the window and listen to the clock ticking. Every second is loud, like a heartbeat that hasn't yet started. My neighbors are almost all new. Young. They don't say hello. Once I went up to a guy who was smoking on a bench in my yard and asked if everything was okay. He replied, "You go, Grandpa." There's some invisible glass between me and the world, and it's getting thicker every year. I'm still holding on. Every morning I turn on the coffee maker, shine my shoes, read the newspaper. Sometimes I even go out to the park. I sit there, look at people. No one looks at me. Once a child fell near a bench. I picked her up. Her mother ran up, snatched her out of my arms and shouted, "Don't touch my daughter!" and left without even saying thank you. Recently I turned to Alex, the eldest. I asked him to help with a broken stove. He promised to come on the weekend. A week passed. Silence. I was cold, but I didn't call a second time. Pride is the last thing left. I still remember carrying Alex on my shoulders, teaching him to drive. How Mary cried on my shoulder after her first breakup with a boyfriend. How Josh was afraid of the dark, and I sat by his bedside all night. And now in their eyes I'm just a wrinkled man who doesn't understand new technology and asks the same thing twice. But it's not the physical pain, the arthritis in my knees, or the weakness in my hands that hurts the most. The most is the silence. That silence that rings in an empty room at night, when the city lights go out and you're left with yourself and your past. I started writing down these thoughts because I don't know who else to tell them to. Maybe paper is my last interlocutor who listens to me. But this story is not only about sadness. It's about betrayal, about contempt, about one humiliation that changed everything, and about revenge. Yes, that's right. Because even in old, tired hearts, fire still burns. I remember how new asphalt smells after rain. I remember the first plans for the Illinois Bridge, which I held in my hands like a child. It was my first big project, 1973. I was young, strong, stubborn, an engineer, with a real mission. Bridges are not just concrete and steel. They are connections. A symbol of how one place leads to another. How people can be closer. I built not only bridges over rivers, but also bridges between hearts. Sarah was a teacher at a junior high school at the time. Her voice was like a bell, clear, bright. We met in a lecture on the history of architecture. She adored me, and I adored her. We never had a serious fight. Except for little things. She didn't like it when I left my socks under the bed, and I grumbled that she always took books to the kitchen. Alex's birth is like today. I held him in my arms and cried. No one saw him, because real men, they said then, don't cry. But I cried, because I knew that now I didn't live only for myself. I worked days and nights. In the cold, in the rain, on construction sites all over the country. I missed holidays, birthdays, but I always came back with a gift, with a story. I sacrificed my time, my health. If only they had everything. We bought a house when Mary was still a baby. A big yard, an old pear tree behind the house. I built a swing set myself. In the summer, the children ran barefoot on the grass. Sarah baked a pie, and I, tired, sat on the porch with the newspaper. Those were real years. Josh was the youngest. Quiet, a dreamer. We made model airplanes together. He loved it when I read to him before bed. And I read. Even after difficult changes, with cut hands and a headache, I would sit by his bedside and read. I was applauded at professional conferences. I was respected. Colleagues asked for advice. Students sent letters. I was someone. And at the same time, a father, a husband, a friend. Together with Sarah, we went through both difficulties and victories. When she got sick, I quit my job and took care of her for 2 years every day. Until my last breath. And now, when I enter the room, my grandchildren don't take their eyes off their tablets. When I speak, they don't hear me. And when I remember old stories, the children look at each other. They say, "Grandfather is in charge again." I look at my hands, with calluses, with scars, and think, was it all for nothing? For a long time, I turned a blind eye to the way the world pushes me away. I closed my ears to the silence from the children. But there is a limit beyond which patience ceases to be a virtue and turns into a burden. The worst thing about aging is not loneliness, but the way people stop perceiving you. As if you are no longer a person, but a shadow. In the queue at the pharmacy, they elbow me, silently walk past me. When I ask the younger ones something, they sigh, throw a short, "I don't know," or ignore me altogether. And recently at the bank, when I couldn't figure out how to pay online, a young employee said, "Maybe you don't need to use this anymore. You don't have much time left anyway." She smiled, as if after a successful humorous remark. And I was silent, and clenched my fists in my pockets. I arrived early for Mary's birthday. I wanted to be with my granddaughter, to see her eyes, to give her a box with a melody, exactly the one her mother had once had. But I wasn't greeted with hugs. Jacob opened the door and said, "Oh, it's you. We didn't expect you until the evening. There's not much room here." I entered the house, and a chill seemed to strike me. The guests were sitting with glasses, music was playing, laughter was pouring through the living room, but no one even turned around. I went to the kitchen myself, left the gift. And when my granddaughter did find it, she laughed, turned it in her hands, and said, "What kind of thing is this from the last century?" I wanted to answer, to tell her about Sarah, about that first box that played Ave Maria. But I was silent. No one would listen. Mary just nodded quickly and disappeared into the room with her tablet. Alex came over later and said quietly, "Dad, you understand we don't want you to upset the little one with your sentiments. She has her own life." I went out into the garden alone. I sat down on the old bench from which I used to watch my children chase the ball. Now it creaked, peeling, but it was the only one who still remembered me. And I cried. Old men cry too, especially when no one sees it. A few days later I fell in the supermarket. I just tripped, my legs don't obey me like they used to. People walked past. One man stopped, took a picture on his phone, and left. Only the cashier came up and helped me up. She said, "You have to be careful. It's so easy to end up in a nursing home." And then for the first time, I truly felt they had all already decided for me, that I should disappear. And then a call from the clinic. My application for a free examination was rejected. Because they say, there is no priority. Priority is for the younger ones. And I need to understand my age. I sat in the dark, next to an old guitar that I hadn't touched since Sarah's death. I took it, strung the strings. My fingers hurt. But the music was gone. A melody from the past. My own? And then I decided. No one has the right to decide for me when my time is. No one has the right to cross out my life out of respect, just because I'm wrinkled. I'm not a shadow. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just live, I woke up. And the fire inside lit up. Everything changed the day I dared to go out into the world again, but not with humility, but with fire in my heart. I left my house, picked up the same briefcase with bridge drawings that had been gathering dust in the basement for decades, and drove to downtown Chicago. People looked at me like I was a strange person, a grandfather in a jacket with an old suitcase. But I didn't care. I was looking for someone who might still remember what it meant to be someone. I went to the local college where I used to lecture to students. The secretary shrugged her shoulders and said that the professor who remembered me had long since passed away. But one young professor named Nate heard my name and stopped. Are you Rainer Brady? The engineer who designed the bridge across Illinois?" I nodded, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Respect. Real respect. He invited me into the auditorium. There were 15 students sitting there, and I started talking. Not about the past, but about meaning. About how to create something that will outlive you. They listened. They wrote. They laughed at my jokes. And when I finished, they gave me a standing ovation. I left the building and felt, I haven't disappeared yet. I still have strength. That evening I went to Mary's. Without a call. Just like that. She was surprised. I sat down opposite and said, "Do you know that your mother had the same box that I gave your daughter? Do you know that she cried when she first heard that melody? That it was her lullaby? Have you crossed it out, like I did?" Mary blushed. For the first time in many years, I saw in her eyes not indifference but shame, and maybe even regret. She apologized, but it was too late. Not because I was angry, and because I had already made a decision. The next day I went to the bank and transferred some of the money. I donated it to a fund to support the elderly. And the other part, I opened a fund named after Sarah to support young engineers. I didn't say a word to the children. Let them find out later, if they want to. And also, I started writing. A real book, not a memoir, but a chronicle of the life of a man that society tried to erase. I called it, "The Bridge That Stands Despite Everything." The bridge is me. A week later, I met a guy in the park who had once scolded me. He was smoking. I sat down next to him. "Do you remember me?" I asked. He looked at me, nodded silently. "I'm old, but I'm not a fool. And I still have a voice." We talked with him for an hour. For the first time, without aggression, I told him about the bridge, about the war, about Sarah. He was silent. And then he asked, "Why did you come over then?" I replied, "Because then you looked lonely. Like me." He put out his cigarette and said, "Thank you." Just like that. And left. This is not revenge in the usual sense. I did not take revenge with evil. I simply began to turn myself around, to force myself to look at me not as an old grandfather, but as a person with experience, history, heart. And now I know, even in the darkness you can light a light. The main thing is not to be afraid to light the first candle. Since that evening in the park, when I had talked to the boy, everything had changed, not in the world, no. In me. I was no longer just a passive observer of my life. I had become its architect again. The next morning, I woke up with a real sense of purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't lying in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could make the day go by faster. I got up, made myself some coffee, sat down at my desk, and opened a blank notebook. On the first page I wrote, "This is my story, and it's still going on." Writing was hard. My back ached, my hands trembled, but each sentence brought relief. I remembered not only the pain, but also the moments of strength, joy, triumph. The night Sarah agreed to be my wife. The day Alex won the school math competition. Mary playing the piano in front of a full house. Josh building his first radio-controlled car. I decided to step out of the shadows. I signed up for a computer literacy course at the library. At first, everyone looked at me like I was a weirdo. But when I told them that I was an engineer and designed bridges, one of the young teachers started calling me Maestro. It was nice. I learned slowly but stubbornly. I started a blog. I called it Notes from the Bridge. And what's interesting is that people read it. They commented. They wrote, "Your words are inspiring. You reminded me of my grandfather. Thank you for sharing." Once I published an article about how older people are excluded from public life. It got hundreds of views. It was even spread by local media. And then I decided it was time to create a community. I gathered people like me. We started meeting in a city park. We wrote, shared stories. Some read poems, some sang. We created our own club, Voice of the Generation. I converted one room in the house into a kind of mini studio. I learned how to record videos. I read excerpts from the book, commented on events, talked about life. And young people started listening. They wrote me private messages. Some came to the park, listened to our meetings. One boy even said, "I thought you were all just grumbling about the past. And you are a real hero." My children didn't find out about this from me. They were shown an interview I gave to a local TV channel. Mary called first. She cried. She said she regretted not listening. Josh came and said, "You are cooler than all the YouTubers I know." Alex was silent for a long time. And then he came on Sunday and said, "I am proud of you. And I apologize." But now everything is different. I do not depend on their attention. I have found myself. I have built a new bridge not from concrete, but from truth, memory, and strength of spirit. I am 78. And I have not broken. I am sitting now on the same park bench from which my second birth began. In front of me is a summer evening. The trees cast long shadows. The wind plays with the leaves. My book lies next to me, already with a signed publishing contract. I do not expect fame. I just want someone someday to read it and stop. Think. Maybe call their grandmother. Or just sit next to someone older and listen. Aging is not a sentence. It is a privilege. But only when there is respect nearby. Because we are not just old. We are carriers of experience. We are bridges. We can be ignored, but without us there is no way back. And there is no real understanding of where to go next. I do not hold a grudge against my children. Their world is tough, fast, ruthless. They learn to survive without looking back. But I taught them otherwise. And maybe now, years later, those lessons are starting to sprout. I see it in my granddaughter's eyes when she comes over and asks, "Grandpa, tell me another story." My house no longer feels empty. Because I've filled it with voices from the studio, from meetings, from blogs. Even the silence has changed. It listens, not oppresses. When I walk through the city, people sometimes recognize me. They greet me. A policeman at a traffic stop said, "Are you Rainer? The same one? My dad read your article. He called Grandpa after that for the first time in 5 years." And then I thought, maybe this is my revenge. Revenge not through bitterness, but through example. Through action. Through a voice that cuts through indifference. I've been asked if it's too late to start something in old age. I've answered, late is when you believe it yourself. You can be a lamp even when the light is already dim. The main thing is not to be afraid to light it. Now, when I remember my path from an engineer to a shadow, and then back to myself, I know I live for a reason. I built not only bridges across rivers. I built a bridge across indifference, across oblivion, across generations. And if someone is reading this now, thinking that they are alone, that no one hears them, that life has already lost its meaning, remember my words. As long as you breathe, you can change the world. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.
Subscribe and like and share this video with your friends.